The cut of meat that I'm using today to cook our well done steak has a really good amount of fat in it, has a good amount of marbling. It's about an inch thick, very much a perfect steak for cooking well done. The fat content is going to keep this steak tender and juicy. Now, one technique that I like to do with steaks, especially ones that are being cooked well done, are doing a dry brine. Pat the steak dry, put a good amount of salt on it. Now, the salt is going to flavor the steak, yes, and it's also going to help tenderize it. There's really no rule on how much salt to use when you're dry brining, but generally I do about half to 3/4 of a tablespoon for a 10-ounce steak. So the cut of meat that I use today is a ribeye. Has a nice, rich, meaty, beefy flavor. I salted it, let it sit in the refrigerator for 24 hours. Now the salt's gonna really help develop that richness that meat has, and it's gonna develop even more umami that a good pan-seared steak is supposed to have. The salt helps tenderize the steak. It helps add a little bit of flavor, complementing it with a pan sauce. I'm using lemon, garlic, onion, butter, cream, a little bit of vegetable stock to kind of help keep it nice and light. You could use chicken, you could use beef stock, whatever it is that you want to use, right? Rosemary, sage, and thyme are fresh herbs that really complement pan-seared steaks just beautifully. So about a stem's worth of each, give them a rough chop. 5 cloves of garlic, give them a quick smash. Remove that outer paper layer, give them a thin slice. Thinly slicing the garlic is going to help give our pan sauce a nice consistency, nice texture. Half of a yellow sweet onion. Cut the onion horizontally once, then run your knife down vertically about 5 or 6 times. Just kind of depends on the size of the onion you're using. Really, I'm going for a small dice. However you want to cut your onion up is completely up to you, but just try to make sure that the pieces are somewhat consistent in size so that they cook evenly and you don't leave too much waste. I have been warming up my saute pan for about 2 to 3 minutes, checking to see if it's fully warmed up by placing some water in it, and if it beads up and dances on the surface of it, you're ready to go. Make sure to dry up the water before placing any oil in the pan. Pat the steak dry. The only other seasoning that we need to add to the steak is some freshly cracked black pepper. The dry brine definitely salts the steak enough, so we don't need more of that. 1 tablespoon of oil goes into the pan. Drop the steak into the pan away from you and pat the other side of the steak dry. I'm going for a good caramelized crust on the steak, which would be hard to achieve if there's moisture on the outside of the steak. Freshly cracked black pepper goes heavy as you like. I like a lot of black pepper on my pan-seared steaks. Now you just want to let the steak cook in the pan without disturbing it. We're going for a good crust. This is going to generally take about 3 to 3.5 minutes depending on thickness, depending on how hot your pan is for a well done steak. That caramelized crust, as I'm calling it, is the Maillard effect. I'm not going to necessarily go into the whole science behind it today, but just know that it equals caramelization, which equals great flavor. After about 1.5 to 2 minutes of the steak searing on the second side, I drop in 2 tablespoons of unsalted butter to the pan, let it melt, drop in some fresh herbs, rosemary, sage, and thyme once again, and I'm just going to baste the steak with the hot butter, placing the herbs on top of the steak while I'm basting, and that's going to help flavor the steak. The internal temperature that we're shooting for a perfect well done is 155 degrees. By the time the steak rests and the carryover cooking is done, it's going to bring the temperature of the meat up to 160, 165. While the steak rests, let's move on and make our pan sauce. 1 tablespoon of oil goes into the pan. The chopped onions go in, a pinch of salt. We're going to sweat down the onions for about a minute, minute and a half. When the rawness is cooked off and the onions start to caramelize ever so slightly, throw in the sliced garlic. And I may want to add that I reduced the cooking temperature to medium. A couple tablespoons worth of unsalted butter is going to go in next, freshly cracked black pepper, and sweat the onions and the garlic down for an additional minute, minute and a half until the rawness is cooked off the garlic. And I want to get a little bit of color to the garlic too. I'm not just cooking the rawness off of it. Since garlic has a tendency to burn rather quickly, just make sure that you're stirring the ingredients relatively frequently. I love that beautiful browning that's on the onion and the garlic is leaning towards the side of it wanting to be crispy. I deglaze the pan with about a half a cup worth of my vegetable stock. I'm going to let that reduce for about 2 minutes. While it's reducing, add a good pinch worth of the freshly chopped rosemary, sage, and thyme. I like to use my spoon to scrape up those beautiful caramelized brown bits on the bottom of the pan. At this point in time, I taste the stock as it's cooking to see where the seasonings are at. I need to add a little bit more salt. I need to add a little bit more black pepper. Of course, this is all to taste. And one point that I want to make is as sauces reduce, you really want to be careful not to over salt because it will become more salty as the sauce thickens and reduces as that water content is evaporating out and the flavors are getting more concentrated. The stock has been reduced to a point where I'm liking how reduced it is. So at this point, I'm going to add a third cup of heavy cream. We're going to keep continuing to simmer the sauce until it reduces to a nice, beautiful, thick consistency. Generally speaking, this time frame could be anywhere from another 2 to 2.5 minutes for the sauce to reduce to a thickness that I'm liking. I'm looking for consistency, and I'm also looking for a specific color. So the sauce is fully reduced when I take my spoon and I streak the bottom of the pan, and it stays separated for about a quarter of a second. Basically shake the pan, and it moves more as a solid mass. So here I'm gonna finish it with probably like 12-15 drops of lemon, another knob of butter. The butter adds a little bit more body to the sauce, adds a little bit more richness, as if it's not rich enough. After the butter gets tossed in, kill the heat and gently stir in the butter until it's fully melted. This is basically going to, like I said, add more body to the sauce, add a little bit more richness to it. It's going to have a nice smooth, velvety consistency on the palate. When you have a properly rested steak, when you cut into it, the juices from the steak aren't going to go completely everywhere. The amount of time that it took to make the pan sauce is the perfect amount of rest time for the steak. I'd say that was about 10 minutes. Cut into the steak and you can see that it is visibly juicy. Believe me when I say that this steak has an incredible amount of flavor. It is tender, it is juicy, it is delicious, especially when it's paired with that lemon and garlic cream pan sauce. A beautiful complement to the steak would be roasted asparagus, some mashed potatoes, or even whipped parsnip, one of my ultimate favorites. Just make sure that whatever you're going to be serving with it is going to complement the steak very, very nicely, and well, enjoy. There are obviously a bunch more delicious recipes on the channel, so go ahead and make sure to click that recipe card that you're seeing on screen. That is my chili verde recipe. Incredible amount of flavor, and that pork is superbly tender.